Sure. Yeah. I mean, me, I'm like, I don't give a shit if you go home and just get your damn job done. Okay.
What a lovely thought.
Yeah.
What a lovely
We have a
metaphor.
program in the UK where 5 comedians get around a table and it's called As Yet Untitled. And as the program goes around, they look for titles that the main guy signs off with it. But I think you just signed this one off with, I don't care. If you...
Hey guys, it's Cowboy and Mark again, back at BizUnLearned, since I was reminded that I fucked that up in the first episode. And this is episode 10. We finally went double digits, man. I mean, once we get up to 2,965, I don't know if I'm going to remember those numbers, but but we're at episode 10 now, and we've got another excellent guest for you, and this is definitely going to be enjoyable. I have a feeling. Okay, so Mark, you want to lead us in?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you for that, Bill. Yeah, he does just about remember a few of the first 9, but from here on in, who knows what's going to happen on this. But we are lucky enough to have a chap called Bruce Lewin with us today, who I've got to know a little bit in only the last sort of 6 to 8 weeks, really. Bruce, have I been tormenting you? Haven't I? Really,
That's right.
It's only about that time. And the reason that we wanted Bruce here with our BizUnLearned theme is because the main things that Bruce has done, and as I'm looking before the project I mainly know him for, the Love, Trust and Wealth, the stuff around decision making and pretty much everything that I can see so far from the short time I've known Bruce. It's whether we call it deliberately disrupting business, or certainly getting into, guys, why are we doing this thing the hard way when there are easier ways? That for me almost, Bruce, is whether it's the psychometric stuff and whether the areas that we're going to get into. So why don't you kick off? We don't do the standard background type, tell us 47 years of your history, Bruce. But what is always useful for listeners is to get just a sense of kind of how did you get here to be dealing with, him with the hat, and I'll put my hat on at the end as people know a little bit now. How did you get here? What's the pathway to the particular? It's not so much the project we'll talk about, but the unlearning that what you're doing represents to the listeners. How did you get here?
So I think it's a very broad question. I think
it is.
I think probably the starting point was kind of developing the 4G model and psychometric and all the kind of reporting materials, which was really done in sort of the early and mid 2000s. And the sort of premise behind that was based on the fact that you can start to predict how people are going to work together. And those predictions, sort of hold water and people recognize.
Hold on a minute, Bruce. I'm just gonna warn the listeners on this. And Bill, by the way, he just did 2 in that first, not even a minute, maybe. The 4G thing. I'm going to get you to define it, Bruce, because he's one of those clever inventors that he expects everybody else to know. And then, Bruce, you're making a bloody hell of a point about this. You start to be able to predict other people. So I am going to make you flush these things out.
So 4G is really a sort of framework of materials, psychometric software, coaching materials, reporting materials, and so forth, that allows you to understand both individuals and kind of how they process information, as we would say. Secondly, you can then predict the relationship between any two people, whether they've never met before or if they've known each other for decades. You can still provide insights as to how that relationship will work, and the relationships themselves are ordered from kind of most productive down to least productive. And then the sort of third kind of I guess sort of facet of the model is you then have insights into group values and group dynamics and shared culture. So how are certain groups of people going to, what sort of environments and contexts are certain groups of people going to perform in better and gravitate towards and have a preference for and be high performing in, as opposed to contexts and environments where that isn't quite the case, where it's not as high or not as optimal. So that's kind of a little bit about the sort of 4 GPs. Then I guess in terms of how we got to here was, so September of this year, having been sort of doing a lot of testing and bits and bobs around this Love, Trust, Wealth network, I was introduced to Mark via a mutual friend. And so we've been chatting about the network, dialogue groups, the 4G model, and we have had quite a ultimately very broad conversation around kind of pretty much all the dynamics and aspects you could imagine around a psychometric powered social network and its implications for business and members. But yeah, without sort of spending, inordinate amounts of time, does that help you? Does that kind of give you an overview?
Yeah, and you just said a killer line.
Go on.
You just said the psychometric powered something you added, your psychometric powered
social network or network, yeah.
But that, I mean, psychometric's a bit jargony for people, but it's getting out there. It's a word that's out there that people, I'm nagging Bruce nicely on this because again, he's so good at his material, and Bill knows this too, that these experts, as the way I'm looking at the screen with them sitting either side of me, they're always good at what they do, but describing it so mere mortals can go, that sounds fantastic. I want 7 slices of that. Yeah, that's a whole different deal. So let's do a reality check then, Bruce, to get a completely different view from the other end of the scale here. Bill, what did you just hear him say that, and how does that apply? Does it apply to your world, or is it teamy dynamic?
Here that he's rubbing elbows with Myers-Briggs and strength deployment inventory. Red people, blue people, green people, yada, 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 yada. Okay? He's assertive directive. He's a fucking engineer. She's a fucking HR person. This guy doesn't know what color he is. He pisses off everybody. Okay? That type of
thing. Bruce, is that too? I mean, I know he's being simplistic to make the point, but is that when you think of Bill as yes, he's a super project manager, and historically he's worked in very big companies, so that isn't necessarily the first market that you're going to with Love, Trust, and Wealth, but we know it's got other applications as well. But is when Bill says, Myers-Briggs, which even my son as a 21-year-old, it seems to have endured as the one he most knows from that age. Is it too simplistic, or is that a good way to get people to start to then differentiate to what you do?
Well, I think the story I would tell is that, people, I mean, obviously everyone's going to have an opinion on all these things, and this is all very kind of subjective, but if one were to speak in generalizations just for the sake of the conversation, I think if you focus on independent business people as the audience, across many industries, but if we just stick to independent people, independent consultants, freelancers, small business owners, the networking that's available to them and the conversations and feedback you have when you talk to them about networking and the networking experiences is very much sort of 7 out of 10 on a good day, 6, 5, 4 most other days. And I think that, I think that sort of happens because you're left now through technology on the one hand and kind of life at large on the other hand. There are just literally hundreds of thousands of people who want to connect with, and that you also want to connect with as well. So whether that's in person and networking events or conferences or whatever, you pick up 5-10 business cards, you have little coffee chats and little catch ups with people, and people you meet for the first time. Or if you're online and you're connected with people via LinkedIn or any other Slack groups, webinars, Zoom meetings, whatever it might be, blogs and Substack, and the whole list goes on. You come into sort of 3 things happen, right? I think when it comes to networking for this audience. The first two are great, but are happen very extremely rarely. And the third thing happens all the time, and it's as follows. The first thing is you meet someone and they're like, oh my God, Mark, I'm so pleased I've met you. You're the perfect person for my project. The budget is approved. Can you start in January? I'd love you to start. I'd love you to work. Join me on this project. And you're like, amazing. I found a client. I don't need to do a lot of work. Brilliant. That's why I network. But it happens so rarely as to be,
Right.
it maybe once a year, once every other year, whatever. It's very, very rare, right? The second one is again, it's very rare, but it's like, oh my God, Bill the Cowboy. We have so much in common because I also love hats and beer and being a cowboy. We're going to be best friends, right? We're going to be best friends. When can we go out for coffee, or when can we go out for a barbecue, or whatever, right? It happens, but It's very, very rare, right? And then you're left with, as happens probably 99% of the time, it's like, I've had these great chats with people, and there was no obvious basis to follow up with them for something in the short term. And then as the weeks and months go by, it's like, why should I reach back out to them? I don't want to look stupid. My things haven't quite come to pass yet, or I'm still on my existing clients, and the new things I was talking about haven't manifested themselves or materialized yet, whatever. And people end up collecting these, it's either literal physical business cards or it's connections online. And then you're like, well, why would I get back to these people? And so you just don't, right? And so they just become numbers, and you can go online and look at people you're connected to.
What you're kind of talking about is that, like, those people don't feel like they've got anything to fucking offer.
Yeah, there's no basis to reconnect and build a relationship, right? It's typically what happens.
Yeah. I can understand that. I've seen many people like this. Okay, they don't feel they have anything to offer.
Right.
They lack the confidence. Okay. If we were back to Myers-Briggs, we're introverted, not extroverted. Yada 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 yada. All of that stuff, right? And and all of this happens during project management team development. Okay. And I was in a mission critical group. That's what they called it, mission critical group. We did a lot of government stuff, obviously. Okay, mission critical, Pentagon, shit like that, right? I was actually engaged to another woman at the time to be married, and I got into a fight with the woman who would become my wife. And she threw shit at my fucking head. Okay, right? I looked over at my buddy and I'm like, dude, I think I'm sexually aroused. Okay, right? We ended up getting married.
Right. Well, okay.
But it has a lot to do with the working relationships and the fact that, hey, man, the team building process is forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning.
Yeah.
You cannot get to norming if you don't do storming.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're going to be fighting it. You're going to be fighting it out about something.
Yeah.
In the story. And so some of the things that I teach when I teach project management is, I've taught project management all over the world: Thailand, Malaysia, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and I was PMO manager for the Ministry of Interior of Saudi Arabia. So I've taught all over the world, and in the process, I realized that English was not their native language.
Yeah.
And I got married in Ukraine.
Okay.
Just at the beginning of the war.
Wow.
So
great.
True love. She spoke Russian.
True love.
And I was recruited by the United States government at the age of 20 under secret, and she was in the Ministry of Interior of Ukraine when it was the Soviet Union.
Right.
So as far as America's concerned, an American spy made a fucking Russian spy, and now I'm in South America. Fuck off. Okay. And so it just seemed like natural progression, although I never thought about it, to have to teach, business English.
Right.
And part of that is critical thinking and, team building and the whole process and the different kind of people, because, business English is not about grammar and sentence structure and shit like that. It's like, this guy is a former fucking Green Beret. Don't go in there like you're a fucking pussy.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's like right up your alley. You know what I'm getting at?
Go on.
Well, I mean, you're talking about how people will interact.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. You're talking about how people will interact. I mean, we were hiring for people for the team in Saudi Arabia, and I had this Green Beret with me who happened to be the country president, the company president for the country. We're interviewing this guy, and he's like, "Why do you want to come to Saudi Arabia?" And he goes, "I love Saudi Arabia." And he goes, "Don't fucking lie to me. Nobody loves Saudi Arabia. Okay, now don't lie to me." And he goes, "Okay, I need the money." All right.
Okay.
But that's the thing, knowing who the hell you're dealing with, who the hell you're networking with.
Exactly.
I mean,
yeah,
right?
That's absolutely it. And I think that's the thing when you talk to people about what they're looking for from networking. Yes, you want to develop business, obviously, but I think it's a reasonable thing to say that networking is not the same as a sales process. And the way you interact with people initially in a networking context is quite different from when you're trying to sell them something either from cold or when you've been introduced by another client or whatever, go and talk to Bill and, whatever. But I think for me, what I've learned, as I say, since September on is that there is a big kind of people in this audience, right? The independent business people. Community is similarly as important, if not more important, than purely generating revenue. Everyone knows you've got to do that, absolutely. But some people, for a multitude of reasons, and again, sort of bearing in mind we're sort of a few years past COVID now, building a community is also very important. And finding groups of small numbers of people who are committed, where you've got professional interests, where you actually can talk, you get on, you can build relationships and build commercial outcomes, and that takes the time because you've got to have the trust. You don't really do business, certainly not in a B2B setting where you're selling things for basically thousands of dollars upward, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, whatever. Where you're selling things like that, you have to effectively have real conversations with your clients, real conversations with your suppliers and your people, and that requires trust. Right. And to build those networks, that's just how it works. Right. There's no real way. We're not talking about stationary supplies for offices where, it's a much more transactional. Here's a catalog, whatever. Right. Sort of Amazon for offices. When you're actually selling services that require or really anything that requires significant spend, people will nearly always talk to you first when they're getting to know you before they write you a check and agree to send you a purchase order, etc.
Then no. It depends on whether you've established yourself as a brand.
Will be accepted where people already know you.
I often tell students, don't describe yourself as a software programmer. Don't describe yourself as an SEO analyst. Don't describe yourself as that. Give a name to it. I'm Cowboy. Everybody fucking knows Cowboy, right? And then I often ask students, I'm like, listen, because they ask me, they're like, you were the project management office manager for the Ministry of Interior of Saudi Arabia. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, did you meet members of the royal family? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, now let me ask you a question. Do you think I filled out an application for that job? And they went, no. And I'm like, I did not. They called me.
Right.
I did not fill out a fucking application for a job I didn't even fucking know about. And it's a $16 million sub project of a $1 billion effort.
Right.
And I got flown across the fucking world to do this thing. So branding is huge,
Right.
you know. Branding is where you don't need to be selling. They
Right.
either fucking want you or they don't.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, and this is right up Mark's alley. What do you think?
Well, like everything, you've got to create. The only difference between a magnet and a piece of ordinary metal is the magnet's got its molecules lined up to attract what it wants, and that's the opposite of what most businesses are doing today, because they've got 69 different things that they're doing, but none of them really make any difference. So the biggest unlearning point that we've got today is we've got to come back to what really it is that makes, in the design of a business, what's the main functions for that. Because most businesses that we see, and I'm talking to businesses in some cases, not the brand new little startups, companies that are doing a couple of million, and they quickly hit a buffer because everything's in the wrong place, then everybody's all stressed out. I mean, why have we got this complete business narrative? If we've all got these tools and we've got access to people like Bruce's work, why is everybody so stressed out? And the simple answer is they're all in the wrong place. So what we've got is a world of busy fools.
Yeah, I think you made a great point when we were chatting earlier in the week, Mark, about designing business. I mean, it's a big goal, a big challenge, to do a little bit boiling the ocean style. But I think that when you look at how a lot of businesses work, and the kind of processes and technology that underpin them haven't changed that much over the last 2 or 3 decades, only last 2 decades. And I think you can also get a sense of how, in my mind, a lot of businesses struggle with quite elementary challenges around managing people, which is, the debates about working from home. The fact that it's still a relevant subject, and you will still see headlines about big corporations making decisions about this. And obviously the fact that it was obviously enforced on everyone during the pandemic, and yet the technology had been there for arguably at least 10 years previously. It shows you the values and the systems and the processes by which a lot of businesses are run today, and the scope for improvement.
But that,
it's a very interesting thing that you mentioned there that I've watched happen over the last 6 years on a personal basis with a friend of mine that I've known for over 20 years. He came down here to South America. He saw this place. He saw how cheap it was. He knew he could work remotely. He's a bean counter, so he can fucking count beans anywhere in the fucking world. I mean, give me a break. I'm like, what the fuck is your problem? You can work anywhere. Why are you in Houston, Texas? Okay, right? And he's like, fuck this. I'm going back home. I'm selling everything. I'll be back in 6 months, right? Okay, so this was like 2018, I think, right? And he took another project, but he was really deeply worried about the remote thing, because we get this theory X, theory Y type of people,
Yeah.
Theory X, you need a hammer on your fucking head. Theory Y, we go out and fucking write books and shit, and we make our own projects, and
quite
and
theory X and
Right.
theory Y, Bruce,
Yeah,
isn't it? Really,
I know.
hammer on the head, and
I know. I was going to say, that the hammer supplier is doing very well.
yeah, it's quite a summary. So, Bill, theory X, theory Y in cowboy terms. Yeah.
So my friend was like, I'm like, dude, what the fuck? I'm like, you can work remote, fuck out of the country, make American money, down in South America, Mexico, wherever. Okay, just fuck off. I mean, all your kids are grown, your parents are dead. Who gives a fuck? Leave. And he was like, well, I think if I stayed home, I would just drink beer and watch movies. And so he was very theory X as an employee.
Right.
But then COVID happened. and he was forced to work from home. And so I got calls from all over the fucking world with people going, all right, you're going to show me how to use Teams. You're going to show me how to use Zoom. You're going to show me all this stuff because they're making me work from home, right? So he gets used to this, and then he realizes, wow, I can do this anyway, right? So this year, a week before the presidential election in the U.S., he fucked off and moved to Mexico. He finally moved after 6 years.
But Bruce, we're making it. This is kind of the heart of the matter around a lot of the stuff that you do, as far as I see it. This, because Bill using an example of his guy that eventually, right, I'm going to go to Mexico. Right, cool. I can bean count anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Then the stuff that you and I talk about a lot with, love, trust, and wealth and the likes, and your work generally, because it's not just the brand, it's more the overall approach. What that's getting us into is whether it's the design of businesses or probably in bigger company speak, organizational development type land. Fundamentally, where you're getting into now, or where your work, I think, opens us up to, is we currently are creating commercial business environments that do not work for the bulk of the quote workers or the people involved in the process. And that's the major business unlearned point that we're making, or that you're wrestling with, because if you don't deal with that problem going in, so Bill points out in his inimitable ways to his buddy about you can do this anywhere. It takes COVID plus X years for the penny to drop. You go, well, in reality, that old way of working is not fit for purpose. And the place that you're taking people through your work is having them look at that in terms of the communication between, whether it's with co-workers in the traditional sense, or whether it's in a network of building virtual teams. That's the major hit that your work gets into.
Yeah, and I mean, as you were chatting, I was kind of thinking of 2 or 3 studies that kind of illustrate this unlearned environment as we've been talking about. And I think this is probably a little bit old now, but probably is worth revisiting. But let's say, to pick a date, around 2013, 2014, I can't forget exactly when it was. But there was some research from Gallup on their engagement survey across the world on a longitudinal basis. So let's say they looked at 20 countries or whatever it was, longitudinally over, near enough 10 years or whatever it was. And they basically found that once you control for the starting point, so for example, I think Germany has about 30% of people engaged, and I think the US is like 20 or 40 or whatever these starting figures are for the different economies. When you roll this out over 10 years, using Gallup's own engagement surveys, those figures of number of engaged employees do not rise consistently. They're flatline, right? They flatline over a decent period. Let's call it 10 years. And I think they flatline. Again, you've got to remember who are Gallup's clients and who are Gallup and what sort of things they bring. Market leading company, global clients, plenty of resources for experts and consultants and internal initiatives around engagement and HR and org development, as you said. And yet, despite them throwing, metaphorically speaking, the kitchen sink at engagement, no one has moved the needle. Right now, as I say, that data is a little bit old, but I suspect it hasn't really changed very much, because you would have felt and heard the cultural shifts.
Yeah, from what we know, Bruce, it's got worse. Engagement's gone down in that period.
Right, there we go.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that's kind of interesting was, so there's a guy called Laszlo Block who used to be the HR director for Google. And again, let's say this is like 2016, 17 or whenever it was. He ran 2 projects in Google with the Google staff. One was called Project Aristotle and one was called Project Oxygen. And I forget which way round it was, but one was looking at what makes a great leader. The second was looking at what makes a great team. And they had great data. They had, in lots of great methodologies and so on. And in terms of what were their findings and how replicable they were, there wasn't very much in there that you could go, oh, we're at another company. This is really useful. Let's go and do this. The one thing that really came out of this was psychological safety, which is and I'm sure those studies played a big part in popularizing that language, right? And that idea and how important it is for people and so on and so forth. And that's probably something they can lay some claim to. What I think is equally as interesting, in addition to sort of the relatively subjective notion of psychological safety, because again, one person's idea of kind of constructive, a sort of genuine, friendly laugh, it could be another person's very challenging environment that is very stressful and very triggering, as we can appreciate. But as aside from the psychological safety stuff coming out, what I thought was also very interesting was when Laszlo Block then left Google, he didn't go on and say, we've done these great studies on leadership and teams in Google, let me go and help everyone and build a consultancy or build some products or whatever. That was directly linked to this, he went to do something else around sort of basically micro coaching, which is arguably a bit of one or two jumps away from this work, which again suggests that there's lots of interesting ideas, but it's very difficult to find something as a tool set or as a process that is replicable and embeddable into a business in really any scale, but certainly once you get 5, 10, 15 people upwards, where you can say this really makes a difference and this is core to what we do, and so on and so on and so forth. And so again, I think you're back to these challenges around what drives performance, what do people need to unlearn, what are the new things that could help them, etc.
If I remember properly, you were in our integrator webinar.
No, Bruce. No.
He wasn't?
No.
I made a statement there because you're talking about what's the difference between this when it comes to a cultural thing. And they had brought me in for this project from the outside, from Texas. I was up in Pennsylvania with an international team in a secured facility that they built just for the team.
He's always best to be kept in a secured facility, Bruce.
So,
yeah.
I can see how that came together.
The CEO wasn't even allowed to badge in, and we were getting ready to do a schedule for the project. I started with a basic post-it note methodology on the wall, blah blah blah, which I think many of us have used, and some smart ass from Pennsylvania was like, yeah, we tried to do this before with a couple of Cambridge guys, PhDs from, fucking England, and it didn't work. So how is your method going to be different?
Right.
And I'm like, because I'll fucking throw you out the window if you leave. And they're like, okay. And we got a schedule done. But sometimes culturally, that's the difference. You know what I mean?
And also on that basis, Bill, that's one of your classic stories, that you've got the PhD guys, or you can be thrown out the window. So they're big extremes, but they and we do it to make a point, and they're funny-ish. But looking back on that, and if you get into the work that you're doing, Bruce, what's the implications for the company now? Because clearly, Bill, and I wouldn't express them the same way, but I would definitely be in the camp that says we've got to toughen up. We've got to get more stuff done. That LinkedIn post, it was my LinkedIn post of the year, and it's a guy who runs a business, and he's got like a blackboard there, and he's got a list of all the things he's been asked by his employees that week. And my dog's had its leg off. Can I take it to my horse needs, it just was a ridiculous list of things. Grooming. And what it plays to my gallery is, and Bill will go there too, he would see a very simple response called put everybody on contracts, because then everybody's got their clear responsibilities, job done. We know it's got to be stepped from there, but so much of the conditions of that are being it's all human beings, because we've got the tech pretty much. It shuts down occasionally, as I saw earlier a little bit, but we work around it. But that's not the problem. The problem is the human factor. And so what's I guess in American language, let's be American for a second, Bruce. What's the takeaway, for the key to what people, because there's no question, and I'll declare my bias, your work, you're onto something. I know it's an area I've been around for a long time, but this area, but people kind of go, oh, well, I'll just get me a bit of tech, and they walk away from the problem you're trying to solve. What's the kind of home run that this stuff can help people make?
I think, I don't know if this is very soundbiteable, but I think that if you have a way, so if you look at most businesses, right, virtually all businesses and virtually all organizations, what they, broadly speaking, all have in common across the different departments and different functions is the various professions within those functions, right? They're all driven around repeatable processes and repeatable transactions, where if I do X, 8 times or 9 times out of 10, I get Y,
right,
and I want more Y, right? Savings, lower costs, increased revenue, happier customers, word of mouth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? I want things faster. The goals are not very sophisticated in the sense that they're so generalizable. Like everyone agrees, cheaper, lower costs are better, higher sales are better, happy days, right? It's very simple. And everyone is focused on the processes and the transactions, the technology to achieve that. Because by and large, they're replicable and they're reliable. And if I do it, it's like if I use a database, 99.99 whatever times, that database is reliable, right? If I send an email, right, I expect 99.999 it's going to work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Simple standard diagram methodology.
Yeah, you everyone is built around this, and I think when it comes to managing people, it's that isn't how it works at the moment for various reasons, and it's put down to a whole host of different factors, of which we'd be here for a long time unpicking them all. But there's a bunch of objective and there's a bunch of subjective factors, cultural factors. There's a great long list of things that drive this. And I think what for me is missing, or where if you wanted to shape the opportunity, is if you have something that's reliable and repeatable and consistent, and that also provides input into decision making around people, which is the other key component, you start to create something that could potentially slot into businesses in all the different ways they manage people, both within HR and obviously outside of HR. And kind of that's the way I would describe it in simple terms. Businesses aren't interested in, with obvious exceptions, they're not interested in internal subjective processes, because they're not repeatable, they're not scalable, they're not objective. We can't turn that into something we put on a cash flow statement or the balance sheet in simple, again, to speak very broadly. So I think, and when it comes to people management, there's lots and lots of things out there, but very few of them have that kind of, as I say, repeatable and replicable aspect to them as well, where there's a degree of objectivity and where there's a direct input into decision making. The point being about making decisions around people, they're usually a bit more nuanced than sort of making decisions around objects or money, because they don't speak back to you, right? The computers or the machinery or the plant or the buildings or the money in the bank accounts, that they're inanimate objects at the end of the day. They're never going to go on holiday and send you an email, as it were. So I think that's sort of the scope of things. And as I say, I think that's it in brief. Scalable, replicable, and input into decisions and something that's objective helps to create something that's more powerful and more impactful and more valuable for organizations.
To make a daft point, Bruce, because Cowboy's on the call, obviously, and is running the session as well, that we can make the we can make the daft point to go, right, get in a room with Cowboy for half an hour and you might look at the world a bit differently. And we're partially joking and we're partially serious because, you know, he plays for the laugh and stuff, but he's also deadly serious about this subject. So other than that, then if we apply the principle of getting in the room with Cowboy for half an hour, for you to go, I didn't look at the world like that. I didn't look at my business like that. If we take your body of work, then how do we get the attention of, because fundamentally this problem, we're not going to change business universities that change at the speed of, you know, snails, but we can change hearts and minds of people that are looking to go into business today. And we can change some of the people with vested interest in senior positions as well, because they've got their own, you know, we need to change. But we've got to get people's attention on this subject, because currently the human factor isn't seen as sexy. It's seen as a pain in the arse. Somewhere we've got to get their attention on this subject, because if not, everything else changes, but the human doesn't, and we keep failing.
This is why this network has started to take up more and more time and attention, because when I talk to people about it, they want to be a part of it in brief, right? And by building networks and demonstrating these relationships and this menu of relationships and these better experiences and more reliable experiences in a networking context initially, it's then a lot easier for people to go, oh, well, I now know what this is. I've experienced it. I've done some group calls. I've met some great people. I can kind of see how this could work in my business or with my clients. Why don't we go and explore that now? Because I've got a personal view of it. I've got a personal experience of it, and I can demonstrate, you know, blah, blah, blah. This is what's happened. I think that's the one route to sort of raise people's awareness around that, is giving people first-hand experiences of this in a way that's constructive and valuable in its own right, obviously. And then word spreads and people's experiences. They want to share good experiences, like, as we know. You know, have a great experience, you generally tell your friends or your colleagues or whatever. You know, that's just how we are. You know, I watched a great football match, blah, blah, blah.
I got two burning questions here.
Power on.
You know, one of them is, with all the PC bullshit that's been going around through Europe and fucking America, and all the fucking DEI inclusion shit, how have you been dealing with that? Because that's the fucking elephant in the room, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't buy any of that bullshit. And it's being blown up by Trump in America at the moment, and will be probably for the next 4 years. Whether or not he succeeds in killing it, I have no idea. And then number two is, how are you monetizing this effort?
So, the first part about DEI in psychometrics, you have what's called fairness or bias. And you have to
just so you know, guys, the hat is on. So we're in.
I'm watching.
So the hat is on. So everybody knows what the hat means. This is wrap-up phase, so the listener can go, oh, okay, right, we know where we're at. Sorry, Bruce.
So, as I say, psychometrics typically are tested for fairness or bias. You know, a lack of bias and the evidence of fairness. And on the 4G side, when we get all the data, you look at age, sex, and age, gender, and race, and it was neutral, considered within the bounds of neutrality. So DEI stuff is not really an issue for us. It's sort of, it is what it is, right? And then your second question was monetization, right?
Yeah. What are you doing? You selling this as a service or what?
So the network is still very embryonic, but the idea is to make it a subscription-based service. Once people have joined, met some other like-minded people, and then joined what we're calling dialogue groups between 4 and 6 after a month or 2 or maybe 3 months of that, to then make it a paid subscription.
I got you. You know, me, I've tried to let people know, let students know, to be aware of this stuff, but don't really try and learn it. I mean, there's even churches in America that are trying to come up with new names for God now because they're like the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. They're not like, oh, those are male figures. That's bad. So, they're working on changing religion and shit like that. And I'm like, I'm so done with this. I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm like, I haven't been in the country for 10 years. I don't give a shit. And
Right.
not to mention, I'm so damn old now, it doesn't fucking matter. I mean, I know you guys probably got some years on me, but I'm so damn old now.
Yeah,
I've been kicked off of LinkedIn, Facebook, fucking Twitter, fucking... I don't care. I no longer care.
Right. Sure.
Which is the reason we picked a podcast for a channel. Sometimes people just need to hear what's real and stop being so damn sensitive. I mean, I think so many projects fail because you've got weak people you put on the team, and you had to put them there for some political reason.
Right. I think there's a longer conversation around DEI, but I think there's there's a huge amount of symbolism, history, contemporary rights, victimhood, fairness in society, inequality in society, economic, social. It's a long topic, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, me, I'm like, I don't give a shit if you go home and just get your damn job done. Okay.
What a lovely thought.
Yeah. We have a program in the UK where 5 comedians get around a table, and it's called As Yet Untitled. And as the program goes around, they look for titles that the main guy signs off with it. But I think you just signed this one off with, I don't care if you, as long as you get the job done. But to bring that back to Bruce somewhat and sign up, Bruce,
I mean,
I don't want to.
I
don't want to tarnish your good name, Bruce. But
no, thank you.
Joking aside, it does kind of mean that, because again, we say joking aside, being deadly serious, and because this is a study area of mine in this case, I'm very with the analysis of putting teams together, whether it was with football teams, and I don't care what they do with sheep in their off time, but the reality of it is, your work, Bruce, we've still got to find a way to, it does save businesses money, it saves them time. If ever there's an area that money is pissed away, it's the fallacy of recruitment. And then people would hire people like me in the past and go, I want you to summarize. I want you to motivate my people. And I go, it's funny, isn't it? Because they were motivated when they got here. Now they've been with you for 6 months. They don't like you. So, Bruce, final point on what's the, if you put a Viking helmet on, not a cowboy hat on, what's LTW going to do in the next couple of years to help with this problem?
Well, it's what I said earlier. I think that by showing people, giving people a first-hand experience of these relationships and seeing how much more valuable and beneficial those interactions are, both one-on-ones and in small groups, that experience speaks for itself, is my expectation. And then people will want to spread the word, both in the context of a network and then similarly in the context of, your sort of classic management consultancy, HR, personal development stuff that happens in business.
All right, so folks, me and Bruce are talking on Monday for a good couple of hours on this subject to get into the pithiness of it. So Uncle Bill the Cowboy, no sheep allowed. So Cowboy, take us out, my friend.
You,
Thank you for your time, Bruce.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Well, everybody, Bruce, hey, thank you for joining us. This was great. And to our viewers, remember to like, comment, and share. We love the love. Subscribe. That way you always know when we're doing new shit. When sometimes we don't know we're doing.
And it will be a sheep-free zone.
Yeah, it's a sheep-free zone. Okay.
Thanks, gentlemen.
So take it easy, guys,
Cheers.
and let's get her done this week.
Bye.